Hey everybody, and welcome to Bible class. My Bible is open to the last page of Genesis. If you can find with me, Genesis chapter 50. I want to read with you a statement of Joseph, and then we're going to go back to Genesis chapter 37. Appreciate you being in class tonight. In our last lesson of this series that we will cover next week, we will hear Joseph, son of Jacob, say to his own brothers in Genesis 50, verse 20, "As for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, to bring it about that many people should be kept alive as they are today." Somehow, some way, many people were kept alive. God had a part in that. God clearly had a plan, and somehow God used both Joseph and his brothers to fulfill that plan to keep many people alive. What is that all about? Well, in order to understand it, we've got to open our Bibles back to Genesis chapter 37. This plan probably doesn't begin where you and I would write if we were writing this story. In Genesis 37, Joseph is 17 years old. You can start reading with me in verse 3. Israel. You remember we've talked recently how Joseph's father, Jacob, had his name changed by God to Israel. Israel had 12 sons, but he loved Joseph more than any other of his sons because he was the son of his old age, and he made him a robe of many colors. But when his brothers saw that their father loved Joseph more than all his brothers, they hated him and could not speak peacefully to him. Well, feelings within the family only got more complicated as Joseph has two dreams. We can read all about them in Genesis chapter 37. The first of them is he was out with his brothers and he had a sheaf as he's working in the field. His brothers had sheaves as they were working out in the field, but for some reason, the sheaves of his brothers, bowed down to his sheaf, and his brothers didn't like that dream. Well, Joseph, for better or worse, tells them about a second dream where the sun, the moon, and 11 stars bowed down to him. You can see in Genesis 37 verse 8 that his brothers, when they heard these sorts of things, said, "Are you indeed to reign over us? Or are you indeed to rule over us?" So they hated him even more for his dreams and for his words. A little later on in Genesis chapter 37, Jacob, or Israel, the dad of all these sons, sends Joseph to Shechem to check on his brothers who are out with the flock. Joseph goes and he hears that they have gone from Shechem up here to Dothan. But as they see Joseph coming from a long ways away, Genesis 37 verse 18, before he came near to them, they conspired against him to kill him. Whoa, whoa, whoa. The oldest brother, Reuben, says, let's not take his life, shed no blood, throw him into this pit here in the wilderness, but don't lay a hand on him. Reuben is thinking that when this dies down a little, he'll come back and rescue him out of their hand to restore him to his father. But at some point when Reuben isn't there, Judah comes up with an idea. Verse 26, what profit is it if we kill our brother and conceal his blood? Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, and let not our hand be upon him, for he is our brother, our own flesh. And his brothers listened to him. There are Ishmaelites headed down to Egypt. And so they sell their brother for 20 pieces of silver. He ends up all the way down in Egypt, sold to a man named Potiphar. He was an officer of Pharaoh, the captain of Pharaoh's guard. But Genesis 39 tells us, verse 2, the Lord was with Joseph. That's going to be really important for you and me, us together, as we discuss this as a class. Everything that is happening, even though Joseph is a long ways away from his father and his brothers and his home, the Lord sees, the Lord knows, the Lord is with Joseph, and he becomes a very successful man as he's there in the house of his Egyptian master, until Potiphar's wife tempts Joseph over and over and over again. We'll talk together as a class how Joseph battles against that temptation, but eventually Potiphar's wife gets so frustrated that she accuses Joseph of being the one who's acting inappropriately. Genesis 39 verse 20, Joseph's master took him and put him into the prison, the place where the king's prisoners were confirmed, and he was there in prison. In fact, we're not even sure how long he's in prison. Genesis 40 verse 1 opens with sometime after this, and we'll dig into it a little as a class, but there's a cupbearer and a chief baker who work for Pharaoh, the king of Egypt himself. They get thrown into this same prison. They have dreams of their own. And Joseph is able to tell them what they're all about. In fact, he asks the cupbearer, before he gets restored out of the prison, back to Pharaoh himself, Joseph has this humble request. In verse 14, only remember me when it is well with you, and please do me the kindness to mention me to Pharaoh, and so get me out of this house. But the chief cupbearer forgot. In fact, Genesis 41, after 2 whole years of Joseph being in that prison, Pharaoh himself has strange dreams, and there's no one who is able to tell Pharaoh what those dreams are all about, except Joseph. Oh yeah, Joseph is back in prison. He's brought before Pharaoh, and Joseph is very careful to tell Pharaoh, what I'm delivering to you, this isn't my idea. This is coming from the Lord. There's going to be 7 years of plenty followed by 7 years of severe famine. Pharaoh is so impressed, he exalts Joseph as the second greatest man in all of the kingdom. And eventually, Genesis 41, verses 56 and 57, as that famine comes just like Joseph had foretold, there was grain in Egypt. The world is saved by God's plan. He works through Joseph. In fact, all the earth came to Egypt, to Joseph, to buy grain because the famine was severe over all the earth. It is the beginning of a plan to keep many people alive. We've got a lot to talk about. I'm going to kick it over to your in-person class teacher, but I appreciate you exploring this with me. We've got one more lesson next Wednesday. In the meantime, have a great rest of your class, and I'll see you real soon.